This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open-source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Today, I am talking to Crypto Finally.
Yes, Rachel from Crypto Finally. You had that right, and you can say my name. That's fine by me.
Okay. Well, you know, everybody's got these weird pseudonyms right now, right? Like everybody, and I get it. People are weirded out about stalkers and freaks, and trust me, it seems to me that crypto has a lot of freaks in it these days. So, Rachel, how are you today?
I'm good. I've been well. Just been a long week. The MTV thing was last week. And just sort of recuperating. I'm going to Florida on Thursday to hang out with Tim and do some live streams. So that's fun. That's on the up and coming.
That'll be fun. I like doing live streams with Tim. And in fact, there's all sorts of interesting stories doing that with him before.
Yes. I watched the live stream you were on with him, and then I texted him immediately after and told him it was my favorite piece of content he's ever done.
It was really funny because I'm sitting here going, guys, all right, I'm going now. But so all right, so you're like this crypto influencer, and you know, from what I've seen, you know, you put out a lot of really interesting, funny, and sometimes ridiculous content. What got you into doing content creation in the crypto space? How did you even get in here?
Okay, well, I come from a mainstream production background. So I've done production in the past. I also have a theatrical background. I wrote plays and a lot of musical theater, actually. And I had friends from my production background who came to New York City for Consensus. In 2018, invited me out to the networking parties, and I really got to know the community from there. I basically saw what there was to offer in the space right now as far as this being the ground floor of a new technology, something so big as Bitcoin and blockchain, and decided that it would sort of be dumb not to get involved. So I started working with a different YouTube channel prior to Crypto Finally, and we made educational blockchain content, some really good videos. And then a few months later, I sort of segued off and started with Crypto Finally. And that's when I brought the music and the production background to the forefront and made like some of those Bitcoin music videos, which is what I'm assuming you're talking about.
Yes, indeed. I actually, unlike a lot of people, I actually try to go out and do some research on the people that I talk to. And usually before I ever even invite them on the talk, because I like to talk to interesting people. And the production musical background is kind of interesting because I'm kind of doing a lot of that outside of crypto as well. So it's kind of fun to hear that. So are you in crypto full time? Is this how you make a living right now, or do you do anything else?
I'm completely in crypto right now. I have several different aspects that I come in from crypto. So there's Crypto Finally. And so, you know, the work that I do as me and myself, I also work with a business partner out of LA. His name's Gio, and we make animations. We make animations for blockchain companies. It's funny. I haven't spoken about this in a while, but
Sure.
We make animations for blockchain companies. We basically break down white papers in easily to understand sort of ways to make it accessible for a consumer, which is more or less the same sort of phrase and sayings that I go along with Crypto Finally, which is let's make it easier for people. But yeah, we do that. And then I have several different legs of what I do with Crypto Finally as well. And then I do some side production things.
So where did the name Crypto Finally come from?
I honestly, it's so funny. People always ask me that. I didn't put as much thought into it as you know, people would assume. And I only say that because I've been asked that question like maybe like 60% of any podcast or interview I've ever been on. I thought that it was fun. I thought it sounded like crypto sort of now. All the handles were available across platforms. I didn't realize the way that the social spaces sort of interacted at the time. Like I didn't realize that people were going to start referring to me as Crypto Finally or Finally. That didn't cross my mind once when I set up these social accounts.
Well, it's kind of interesting when I got into social media probably when you were in elementary school. There was like this kind of like trade-off back in the day. Like the big thing back then was personal branding. Like everybody's like, oh, you got to do your personal brand because, you know, you got to grow yourself so people know you. So all my social media platform names across everything is just my name. And it's funny because when I've been in crypto for a long, or I'm sorry, I've been on social media and Twitter for a long time. And when I got into crypto a couple of years ago, I kind of revived my dormant Twitter account because I'd been on Twitter since they started. I've been on Twitter a long time. And I just got bored of Twitter a few years back and I just stopped using it for years, literally years. And then when I got back on, everybody's like got all these handles. And I'm like, do I change my name on Twitter now? I didn't know what to do. So I just left it because I'm not that creative, I guess.
I know some people who did then change their name over time on Twitter just because, you know, the way that the social space does interact. But there are a lot of people with their real name as their Twitter handle.
Yeah, it's funny. People are like, I got to be this pseudonym. I also find, though, it's like interesting going to conferences. And you're like, oh, you're like the dog head. What's your real name? And it's like, it's just kind of weird to me.
The crypto dog, you know, I don't know what he looks like.
They all have, there's a couple dogs and masks and weird things. And I'm just like, okay, I don't even know what your real name is. Do you to call this person, you know, crypto ninja guy, or do I ask them what their real name is? Because you don't want to offend anybody, right? So you got this production background, got into crypto. Recently you posted an image of you riding a forklift. What was that all about?
I'm forklift certified from my production background. So I worked for the Blue Man Group for about 3 years. Out of their corporate production space, I was the supervisor of that space, and I basically sat in on all commercial and social shoots. I helped the creative team. I did set, build, lights, basically everything that would go in and out. It was a very small team for the scale of work that was going on at the time. About 60 people strong on the corporate end at that time. And me and my supervisor were the only two people who operated things in the production space. And there was a scissor lift. And a scissor lift is different from a forklift. A scissor lift doesn't have the two forks that lift up into a pallet. A scissor lift goes upwards and it still drives in circles like a small vehicle. It's like you might see a scissor lift on a sidewalk walking down the street or in a mall somewhere fixing a light. But it's all the same certification. And so I was using those machines on a regular basis. And so we went to go get me a forklift license. That photo that you saw was taken on a sidewalk in Queens at a Continental Lift location. That's where I got my certification. I'm OSHA certified.
That's pretty awesome, actually. You know, so it's kind of weird. I always tell people I have weird hobbies. So I'm like half like my day job. I'm like not in crypto full time. I don't make a living from crypto at all. And my day job, I'm half blue collar and half white collar. So I'm a former corporate MBA guy that's been an entrepreneur in like the blue collar space for a long time. So I kind of have one foot in one world, but last June, or like starting 2 years ago, or a couple of years, like 4 years ago, I started getting into welding to make stuff. And I take my hobbies really seriously. So like 2 years ago, I went to welding school for a year and a half. I'm a full certified welder. So last June, I graduated from welding school, like the community college. It was like a year and a half program, 4 nights a week. Like I'm a structural welder now. And it's funny because that's why I put that in my Twitter thing that says welder and, you know, MBA welder. And I'm like, it's like true. So like I literally got a whole weld shop in my garage and stuff. So it's kind of funny, but I like to make stuff. So
that is cool. And welding's hard too.
It's really hard.
Yeah, welding is really hard.
I tell people that welding school was harder than graduate school for me because I don't have natural like fine motor skills and I'm really impatient. And so welding those are really bad things for a welder, to be impatient and not have great fine motor skills. So I was like in the middle of the road for my class. I was not the best welder in the class. So, and that was actually really humbling in a lot of ways as well, because I'm usually doing really well. I'm very competitive, and it was like really frustrating for me because I'm like, I'm not the best at this. But I actually really enjoyed it. And I actually really liked the guys in my class. And it was really kind of funny. So my wife is a medical doctor by training, and it was really kind of interesting. Like New Year's, the people I had at my, like, you know, we had people over for New Year's this year, and it was like me, my wife, some other friends, and then my buddy who's like a welder. It's like all just hanging out, and it was like really cool because it's like I totally like can get along with anybody, so it's just like kind of fun. Anyways, enough about me. So production background. So you've worked on a lot of this, you know, sounds like you worked in, you know, TV and entertainment and things like that. How did the MTV, so the MTV thing, you were recently on MTV, and I know you got a lot of crap because they labeled you crypto expert, which is awesome. And by the way, high five to that, because who wouldn't want that on their resume? How did the MTV thing come around?
They found me on Twitter. They found me on Twitter. It was almost a year ago now. And they reached out to me and basically explained that they were going to be doing an episode that involved cryptocurrency. And that was basically it. As we went on a Skype. I flew out to LA. We shot the episode, and then it was in production for about 10 months. I didn't really see any of it before it aired, and now here we are today. So it was pretty simple and quick, but they found me on Twitter.
That is actually really cool, actually. And do you think anything else will come out of that? Or are there going to be any follow-on episodes, do you think?
Not to my knowledge with MTV, but again, I was dealing with the third-party production company. I think it's interesting as well that Twitter had so much backlash, being that they found me on Twitter, which does indicate that people are looking on Twitter for people to talk about stuff like this. So guys, if you were one of the people who wrote like rampant negative things, they're probably not going to then pick you for your expertise next time. But Twitter, it was fun. It was really like a one-off type thing as far as I know. But there's been a lot of really cool stuff after the fact. You know, I'm getting a lot more outlets to actually talk about what I do in the space, which I think is pretty cool as well. And that's sort of with the catalyst of people wanting to talk about the MTV thing.
Well, I mean, to me, it's like I've been on TV before too, in another life, and it's kind of interesting. You don't always plan those things, right? And a lot of times people don't understand that the producers and the directors are the ones that make those decisions. It doesn't mean that you called yourself crypto expert and then all of a sudden that's what you are. Like, and I think a lot of people who don't understand how production works in general in the media, they just don't understand that you have no control over that generally. But let's talk about that a little bit. The kind of the backlash. Tell me what you've kind of had to deal with since that.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure how to quantify that, but you know, people saying things like who watches MTV, that kind of thing, like just sort of like talking down on the entire situation. But I think that that's honestly what's sort of interesting about this is that these people don't watch MTV. These people aren't these kinds of people. The MTV audience would have watched that and known that I didn't call myself a crypto expert because that's what they're good at. And I think it's funny that the cryptocurrency community isn't very good at that. That's my real takeaway, is that we do have different skill sets and we do different things. And just because crypto Twitter doesn't watch MTV doesn't mean that nobody else does. And inherently, that's why it was a remarkable moment, is cryptocurrency was being talked about on an outlet that is not intended for this community.
Well, I think that's really important. And I think that is a substantial paradigm shift, is that crypto is seeping into the mainstream, and just because you're a part of that. So think about that. How ridiculous is the response that you've been given, right? Like on one hand, everybody talks about mass adoption, and then something that could lead to mass adoption happens and they shit on it. And that baffles me. It's like, honestly.
Well, I just believe that people are genuinely good at different things. And there are things that I'm good at that they are not good at. And there are things that they are good at that I'm not good at, but I'm not posting all over their pages telling them about how they don't get enough press for Bitcoin. Oh, you're a miner. Oh, you're a dev. Oh, you're great at all these things. But like, when's your last article, bro? I don't leave trolly comments like that on people's stuff, you know? And that would be the equivalent of what they do to me. Like, just because I'm not good at what you're good at. Doesn't mean that I don't have a valuable skill set to be offered here. It doesn't mean that I'm not talking about a new, interesting, and important topic within the space itself right now. It's just different and it's new. And I think that people are really going to need to step up and open what they have set as their preconceived notion of a tech space if they're really looking for something like global adoption. Like, imagine if PayPal had come out the door and everyone using PayPal was like, fuck you, hipster kids, you can't use our service, like, you suck, you don't even know how PayPal works. Like, do you think it ever would have taken off? No. And it's just stuff like that. Like, really, really look at what you're doing and how you're behaving and how you come off to others. Because honestly, like, I'm not sitting here, you know, feeling overly bashed about what's going on in the space, overly bashed about people feeling bad about me being on MTV. I'm just reading these notifications, hordes of them, thinking like, why is everyone such an asshole? And that's the takeaway. I really just think you're an asshole when you do stuff like that. And I think that if my friends follow you, they're assholes too, and you just make everyone look dumb. That's my take.
Don't filter anything. Tell me how you really feel. Yeah, you know, and I can actually sympathize and empathize with that. And, you know, but I look at it from a different perspective. I come at it from a project view. And when we launched 2 years ago as our little project, and I don't know if you even know what we're doing, but, you know, we launched 2 years ago and we didn't do an ICO or anything like that. We didn't hype or sell tokens or coins. Trust me, it would have been a lot easier at some point if we had the money from selling coins and tokens to do a lot of the stuff we've done so far. But you would not believe the hate that Bitcoin maximalists have dumped on us over the last 2 years. And it's funny because at first when you get into the space, you like want to be accepted, right? You're like, oh, I'm really into this technology. I'm new to the space. I'm not a developer, right? I'm more like you. I'm more of a sales and marketing guy, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a developer. And when we got into the space, it was like, you know, these people would just like, without even knowing you, just shit all over you because you're, you know, especially the Bitcoin maxis are probably the most toxic of them all. And you're like, dude, I'm not a scammer. Dude, didn't sell anything. You know, I'm trying to solve this one problem over here. And you guys aren't even trying to solve this problem over here. Why are you giving us shit? So yeah, I don't get it. And I think you hit on something really, really important, Rachel, is that, you know, we need to get out of this little bubble. There's only like a very small number of people in the crypto world. And this is my take. And tell me what you think of this. I don't believe you're going to get mass adoption unless you have mass marketing. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I believe that. And I also think that a good example of that in the cryptocurrency space, and this is going to be hard to hear, but the big tokens, the big market cap tokens, besides Bitcoin, everything close and beneath, why do you think they have the highest market cap? Why do you think the most people know about them? Why do you think that their creators have 500,000 followers and more on Twitter? It's marketing. They have the most money to put into marketing, and I'm just going to say it. And it's not to say that they're not good. It's not to say that there aren't good use cases. It's not to say that I'm not personally invested in the top market cap coins. I am, but in my genuine opinion, those were coins, those were projects who had money behind them to put into marketing to access the consumer. We heard about them. Everyone knows about Litecoin and Ethereum and Ripple, all of these like coins that we hear about, Tron, all the time. And why is that? What do these creators, what do these founders and companies do differently? And they're putting money into marketing. And I'm not condemning that in saying this. I'm saying that you're correct. It is and has proven to be effective.
So I'm assuming I'm a lot older than you, but I was, you know, a grown up in the 90s. I graduated from high school in 1990. So put in perspective. So I was a grown up all through the 90s. I went to high school starting in 86. Man, I'm really freaking old. But here's interesting. So I was, you know, not even just a kid, but I was an adult when the World Wide Web came into being. In fact, you know, I was in college when people started getting Hotmail accounts and things like that. But the one thing, you hear this a lot with maxis, especially younger maxis who weren't around then, right? Or weren't like old enough to really remember. But they always say, well, crypto is going to take forever and mass adoption will just take a long time because look how long the internet took to, you know, grow. And I turn around and I say a couple things where I think that's wrong. One, do you know how many CDs AOL sent out?
I was just about to say that. So I was only like 6 when that happened, but I remember the AOL CDs because I would collect them so I could go on the internet.
They were everywhere. They sent out millions and millions of those stupid free CDs with the software. AOL is what drove mainstream adoption of the World Wide Web. And
me and all of my friends in the 3rd grade were chatting on AIM every night after school. Like it was a real thing. I completely agree with you on the AOL CDs. That was outrageous.
Yes. And without that, it would have been relegated to college email addresses. That's where it was. And so I tell people, and I'm glad you remember that, because I tell people this and they're like, argue with me, like, because a lot of people make excuses why Bitcoin hasn't been adopted by the masses. And I think it should have been. And I think it could have been if some things were a little different. But the fact is, I think the problem with the BTC especially, or some of these other decentralized projects, is they have no they're not structured to do any marketing. And guess what? We've found, because with our project, we talk to retailers. We're holding their hand. Our whole project was geared around how do you market crypto as a decentralized project? How do you market it? And guess what? You need to do sales. You need to knock on doors. And guess what? Most developers-led projects really struggle with that, because developers typically hate sales, marketing, and business development, so they don't do it. They don't even have people in place to do it. And then they wonder why the projects that do have those people in place are getting successful, and they just make fun of them or tell them they're scams. And it's like AOL. Look, there was HTTP and other protocols back in the day, but AOL took that to the masses, took it to the consumers, and then it went from there. And if you want to deny that, then, I don't know what to tell you, because things just don't magically change. People are lazy, and because of inertia, don't like change, right? So if you make it hard for someone and you don't give them any incentive, they're not going to adopt your stuff. It just doesn't make any sense to you. I mean, do you have any your own family and friends? Are they into crypto? Like, your older family?
Not so much.
Right.
Not like
and why do you think that is?
Well, I just think that they were, it's funny that people say that about older people, not like the learning curve. I know that's probably where you're headed, is like the accessibility and the user interface and their knowledge of the fact that it's there. But I think, like, one step further, I think the reason that my older family wouldn't have known about it is just because they don't exist in those domains and demographics that it has been marketed to, So that's something that I talk about often. The Simpsons is a great example. The recent thing about The Simpsons, and everyone's watching it because they talked about cryptocurrency, and it was geared towards that group. That's something that an older person might watch. That's something that a 65-year-old man might come across. But in my family, they're just not keyed towards that kind of media.
I don't even think it's a learning curve. That actually wasn't where I was going to go. I talk to a lot of people about crypto. I don't push it. Like, I'm not going to harass the poor girl making my sandwich at Subway or something. Like, I don't do that because I just don't want to be a jerk. But I ask people all the time, have you heard of Bitcoin? And you know what? In the last year, I haven't found anyone in multiple states that haven't heard the word Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then I always follow up. What do you think of it? What's your impression of it? And invariably they say it's a scam, or they don't know what it is, or what have you. But it's always negative. It's never like positive.
I think there are three groups of people right now. I totally agree with that. 3 groups of people right now who aren't actually using cryptocurrency and blockchain. And that would be 1, the people who don't know it exists, who are out there. 2, the people who know it exists, like you said, and think it's just not real because they've been sold a bad story on it. And the people 3 who are aware that it exists, would love to, invest in Bitcoin, but just think that it's too difficult for them to get involved and give up there. I was the 3rd person. So my first exposure to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency was during the ICO boost in 2017 with all of the celebrity token endorsements. So I got to hear about it because the celebrities were all talking about it. But at that time, you know, the message that I'm hearing as well is that like all these like nerdy hacker criminals made a bunch of money. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to fucking do that. I'm not that person. I'm never going to figure this out. They're showing all this like cryptographic shit on the news and telling me like money. And I'm like, oh, well, haha. Like, I don't understand that at all. You know, it's just that learning curve. So I was one of those people who just thought, you know, there was no chance that I was ever going to be able to figure out how to own Bitcoin. I was just never going to know. And there was no point in asking any of my friends because it was stupid and they weren't going to know either. And I think that there are a lot of people like that out there right now, who think it's cool. They're interested in it. They just think that it's way, way too hard, because they don't understand how to do it yet.
I think there's definitely that. And I was thinking a little deeper that, you know, most cryptocurrencies right now don't solve a problem that most people have. If you go to a typical person right now, I understand the arguments about, oh, well, their fiat currency is always losing value. Yeah, you know what? The average person doesn't even know what those words mean. So that's not I say crypto needs to solve a recognized problem. Meaning that just because you have this great understanding of Austrian economics and you really understand, you know, all how fiat's, you know, slimy and all that stuff. I get all that, but most people don't. If you want to, you know, get crypto adopted, you need to take crypto to people that have a recognized problem that crypto solves. Most people's grandmothers, Bitcoin doesn't solve a problem for most grandmas out there. In fact, it creates them. It's more expensive. It's slower. It's, you know, it does have a learning curve though. Someone, you know, anybody can get over the learning curve if they care.
I argue differently that it could though.
Do you?
Well, you know, that's like, it's so funny that you said that specifically about grandmas, because you know, the old sitcom trope that revolves around the grandma not being able to get to the bank in time, you know? Like that's a trope. There's a trope about grandma not being able to go get to the bank, and needing to deposit a check or needing to get some money from the family or needing to, you know, something like that. So I think that there are inherent issues that solves, but you're right that it's just too hard for grandma to access and it doesn't make sense for her to go through the steps of making that happen.
Correct.
Yes.
And I think that's the same, like, and this is the thing, like you pointed out earlier, like this whole litmus test about, you know, oh, PayPal, if you're not this, you know, if you're not doing command line interface on Ubuntu version 4.0, you just aren't worthy of our payment system, right? You know, but the problem is the masses don't need to know that. The masses don't know what SWIFT is. They don't need to know how Visa settles things to be able to use it. And I think people get caught up on the wrong thing. And part of that's bias, right? It's like we always look through our like own, you know, kind of lens of the world. And I think this is the problem with developer-led projects, is that developers have a very specific, narrow view of how things are. They're very stubborn because they're generally very smart. But the problem is, and it sounds like you, I come from at least the entrepreneurial view, and they used to say, as an entrepreneur, do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? Kind of thing. Yeah. And in terms of selling, right? Because you know what I'm saying? You know, it's like you got to reach people on their own terms, not on your terms. If you want to try to sell and market to people based on how you personally want to be sold and marketed, if you're a super smart developer kind of person, you're never going to be effective at using those methods at reaching out to the masses.
Yeah. And you know what, I'd take it a step further. I don't think they're necessarily stubborn because they're smart. I just think that their skill set isn't social skills. You know, it's not social intelligence. It's not emotional intelligence. And that's cool. That's fine. Not like the idea that we're all supposed to be like mathematical geniuses and really good at talking to people it's impossible. There are some people who can do that and they are very rich and famous because it is a hard thing to master both. And that's really where the ends meet. You know, people need to sort of branch out and get a better idea of how to interact within social spaces overall, and how that works. And that plays right into marketing, and everything that we're talking about. But I think that it's important for people who might be really, really smart, who might have amazing mathematical and scientific minds, to understand that that does not necessarily mean that you're making the smartest social and emotional decisions. So that's something to consider.
Well, I think what it comes down to is your project's team balanced? Like, it's okay if you have those super, super smart, analytical, introverted kind of people working on the project. In fact, you probably need them and lots of them. And if you can find good ones, you keep them, you feed them, you pet them, you make them really feel at home. But you also need the other pieces. And I think what it comes down to is I think the most successful projects going forward be the ones that have the balanced teams that, okay, we put the right people on the bus and put them in the right seats on the bus. And you need everything.
And I think that a lot of that does go back into marketing. And I know that there are some standout companies who, start from nothing and do no ICO or anything like that and do make it based on their team. But marketing is a really big part of that as well. Like how many people can you realistically bring on a team for how long doing how much work without paying them? So there has to be money somewhere.
Yeah, well, we've been doing that.
Yeah, well,
and it's very freaking hard, by the way.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, that's why I always joke around with people like, oh, you can't do an ICO because that's scummy, and then it's got to be a community project. I can tell you, Rachel, you go try to find someone that will work for free for 2 years to build out a community project with no upside potential, and you let me know how that works, because let me know how that works.
It's not realistic.
It doesn't happen. It just doesn't. But I think it's refreshing talking to you because you get it, because marketing is important and it's not a bad thing. And I think a lot of times people rag on, sales, marketing, business development kind of things. But I also think that if you miss those pieces, you're going to have a really hard time. Because they're integral. You have to have those pieces to be successful. And I don't, everybody gets caught up in this whole oh, it's a protocol. It's not a company. It's a decentralized community project. I'm like, you know what? That's great. You can use those words all you want, but the bottom line is, if you don't think like a company, if you don't think in terms of market share and customer acquisition and user acquisition and all that goes into that, you're not going to be successful long term.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, good. Well, how do we get other people to agree? That's the key here. How do we get the other people out there to get on board with that?
Yeah. Well, I say this over and over again, and this is the exact same thing again. The technology is important. It's obviously important. The technology is the back end of everything, and it's what we're trying to put in the spotlight right now. But after the technology comes the user interface, the UI and the UX, both of which are going to be incredibly important to get your consumer involved in the technology. And then furthermore, the distribution, because you can have the best tech and the best UI, the best UX. But if you don't get it in front of people, they're never going to use your product. So those three things in tandem matter when you're looking at marketing something, especially in a new tech space like this.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we were initially doing our stuff with Tusk, before we ever coded it and all that, I started trying to figure out why crypto hadn't been a mass adopted, or at least have some kind of market share. To me, when you got a 10-year-old project, right, that's got huge brand recognition, apparently big network effect, why aren't people using it? And then I went down this whole rabbit hole of trying to figure out the answer to that question. And one of the things we just looked at is I just started doing homework, and I started going down the lists on like CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko and looking at all the projects. And then I go to their team pages, and I started looking, and I started seeing something. I'm like, developer. I'm like, there's something missing here. And universally, if you go and look at all the projects that actually have teams, right, that are publicly, visible, pretty much none of them have sales and marketing people. And if they do, they're not in a position of authority in the project.
Yeah.
And that tells me two things. One, that organization, whatever you want to call it, doesn't value those functions because they're not putting those people high up in the hierarchy, and that those functions are likely not being performed. And it made sense to me that crypto hasn't been adopted. I mean, so I think with our project, our competitors are Visa and MasterCard and Venmo and PayPal. That's who I view our competitors. I don't view our competitors being Bitcoin, even though lots of other people think that's who our competitors should be. And I'm like, I'm not focused on building an investment vehicle. I'm focused on building a payment system. And I'm looking at other payment systems in my competition, even though we're a decentralized project. And go look at the history of Venmo. I mean, Venmo's been around 10 years. They're doing like 18 billion a year in transactions. Not, transactions. Like, people are moving that much money around, and they're, taking 1% off the top or whatever on every one of those. And so you say, but then you look at Bitcoin and you're like, okay, how many transactions for buying and selling goods and services are actually happening? And it's like, if you're looking at the time frame, if it was a great service and it really performed those functions well, why hasn't that come up like, Venmo has? And it's like, I'm always open to answers, but what do you think?
Oh man, I mean, I think I just think that's like a horse of a different color. So I agree that if you're just looking at payment services, I think that more people should be doing things like that, looking at the model and the product versus just like a token that they're betting against. Because I think that the way you explain that is honestly a better way of hearing a lot of things explained in this space, saying that you're looking at the Venmo versus Bitcoin. I think that that's important. I think that more people need to do stuff like that. And I'm not sure how you would go about sort of adopting something in that fashion necessarily outside of people understanding the space. If the thing that makes it unique and different is the decentralized aspect,
Absolutely. And I also think it's an Achilles heel on a lot of aspects as well. And I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm always trying to reach out and talk to people to learn more things, then talk to smart people like you. So what would be your advice? Two pieces of advice you could give. So if a new project was coming into the space, what advice would you give them? And then for people that want to reach out to, no coiners, what advice would you give them? Think of like a developer. What advice would you give a developer when communicating to the no coiner world?
So for new projects and developers, I think the advice that I would give you would be, dumb it down. Understand that there's a bigger learning curve. You've had your head in your project for a really long time. Not everybody is going to come out off the bat excited and understanding of what you're doing. Make it really easy for people to understand, and try to access more people outside of your sole group to try and understand, does this really have a use case outside of a dev world?
Wonderful. I think that's great advice. Rachel, where can people find out more about you and being the crypto expert that you are?
Yeah, of course, obviously. At Crypto Finally on Twitter or YouTube at Crypto Finally. I do weekly live streams on Friday at 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. at Crypto_Fridays as well, because I'm also a live streaming expert. But Crypto Finally is your safest bet. So Twitter or YouTube.
Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've really had a good time.
Thank you.
All right, I'll catch you later.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.